and they're trying to have you hear something about evidence for the existence of God. All I want you to do with these lines of evidence I've given you is just consider the thought and ask yourself, what is the best explanation? So now we've just talked about DNA information. Ask yourself, what is the best explanation? What would we expect to see in the universe if DNA came about like this? Will we expect that this would be the product of just a random natural cause based on our intuition? Or is this better explained by an intelligent cause? That's all we need to do. Not saying that it proves God, but what is the best explanation, okay? Check this video out.
What constitutes intelligence? How do we ascertain whether something that we observe originated from a mind or from a random, unguided process? We all intrinsically know when something has ceased from being erratic and disordered and has become structured and intended. There is a point when we know that something is no longer accidental but has become intentional. We all recognize when mindlessness becomes mindfulness. Consider SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. When scientists search for signs of intelligence, how do they determine that a signal or code originated from intelligence? They look for specified, decipherable, sequenced order, as opposed to random, unspecified, indecipherable disorder. And if this is the standard they use for determining that a signal or a code originated from intelligence, shouldn't this standard also apply to the specified, sequenced, coded information in DNA? The capacity to detect intelligence is not only used in SETI. It's something we all use in our everyday lives. From the most brilliant minds to a small child, we intrinsically know when we witness the result of intelligence versus randomness. We know when the arrangement of objects is the result of a purely natural cause versus an intelligent cause. Whether it's the arrangement of molecules or everyday items, we know when objects have been arranged to convey specified, meaningful information, and we know whenever we witness this, there is always a mind behind it. We might call it magic or an illusion, but we clearly, intrinsically know it was the result of intelligence and intentional design. We know that in DNA, there is specified, meaningful information and instructions. We know that any time we find information and instructions, whether it's the formation of rocks in a lake, or computer code, or writing on a wall, they will always be the product of a mind.
DNA are the instructions for building all of life. You and your body are a machine made from instructions. So the question to ask is, where did the instructions come from in the first place? In our event, The Code of God, we showed that DNA is an advanced instruction and information system that literally defies comprehension. And in DNA, as biochemist Michael Denton explains, they found artificial languages, decoding systems, and memory banks. They found information storage and retrieval systems, elegant control systems regulating the automated assembly of parts. They found error correction, fail-safe proofreading devices, assembly processes involving the principle of prefabrication and modular construction, and a capacity not equaled in any of our most advanced machines, for it would be capable of replicating its entire structure within a matter of a few hours. All this exists on the tip of your finger. DNA functions like alphabetic characters in a written language. And we all know in here tonight that languages and information only come from minds. You see, ancient fossils and fragments don't offer anything to explain the vast complexity of life and biological information. What is the empirically verifiable experiment that shows a blind process taking a random molecule and then turning it into an advanced language, and then a way to read that language, and then from there turning it into something like an immune system or a clotting system or a neurological system? or the pulmonary system, or the cardiovascular system, or the optical system, or the auditory system, or brain function, or cognitive function, or logic, or consciousness, or self-awareness. What is the scientific experiment that demonstrated that that happened? Doesn't exist. The evidence for design in DNA is undeniable. It screams intelligence. In fact, it is so powerful that it is the reason Anthony Flew, the world's most notorious atheist, renounced his atheism. Even Francis Crick, who was the co-discoverer of DNA, found it impossible that DNA could have evolved naturally. In fact, he and other scientists, get this, they proposed that life on Earth may have been seeded by other civilizations. Where does the evidence point?
And so, if DNA language ever did randomly write itself, it would be worthless without first having pre-existing knowledge of the language. And DNA is like a written language. And we know that languages come from a mind.
So that's the second line of evidence, again, to this accusation that there is no evidence for the existence of God. For the final line of evidence, I've saved the best for last. So recently, recently, at least in scientific history, scientists discovered something pretty amazing. And that is that the fact that your molecules, that you don't just disappear right now, and the molecules in your body don't just fall apart, the fact that that isn't happening is actually pretty remote. You should be, for all practical purposes, you shouldn't be staying together, the molecules in your body. And they have found that in order for you to exist, in order for you to stay a human being and not fall apart and not disintegrate, the very parameters of science and the laws of physics, things like gravity, all have to be set and perfectly balanced to a precision and exactness that literally defies comprehension. And they're seeing that this could not have been an accident. The degree and exactness that these parameters have to be set for you to live and even exist is so incomprehensibly precise that this is widely regarded perhaps as the most powerful and persuasive evidence for the existence of God. It's called fine-tuning. Anybody ever heard of fine-tuning? Okay, what is fine-tuning? We'll talk about it. Imagine all these dials. Now imagine that every one of these dials, in order for you to live, every one of them have to be set to a specific hair's width setting. If any one of those dials are off, you don't exist. So you can kind of look at this. Say this is your life. And think about if your life was this incomprehensibly on a narrow razor's edge in order for you to live. If any of these things were imbalanced at all, you would die. This is a little bit of a visual of what fine-tuning is. And the razor's balance edge that we live on and in our lives. And this is the way that the parameters of science and basically all of the parameters of science like gravity and the constants have to be set in order for you to exist. Now, every one of these dials have to be set. There are literally hundreds of these parameters that have to be set, but we only need to talk about one or two of them. So I want you to check this video out to get an idea.
Did you know that if gravity were slightly more powerful, the universe would collapse into a ball?
I did not.
Also, if gravity were slightly less powerful, the universe would fly apart and there'd be no stars or planets.
Where are you going with this, Sheldon?
It's just that gravity is precisely as strong as it needs to be. And if the ratio of the electromagnetic force to the strong force wasn't 1%, life wouldn't exist. What are the odds that would happen all by itself? The precision of the universe at least makes it logical to conclude there's a creator.
To get an idea of what scientists mean by fine-tuning, imagine a dial the size of the entire Earth, 25,000 miles across. Now imagine we start to zoom in to the increments of this dial, past continents, past the size of Mount Everest, past the size of a human being. And still, the smallest increments of this dial are not visible. So we keep zooming in, smaller, past the size of a virus. And now imagine we zoom in even more, exceedingly smaller, down to the size of a single atom. And now imagine that even the slightest change to a setting this exact would cause all life and matter to cease to exist.
The values of these forces are tuned so precisely that if you change them by an even infinitesimal amount, you would not exist.
To get an idea of just how precisely even one of these values must be set, consider gravity.
One example is gravity, or the gravitational constant. If the value of gravity changed by even 1 part in 10 sextillion quintillion, human life would be impossible. Folks, that's 1 with 40 zeros after it. 40 zeros. To explain how incredibly small 1 part in 10 sextillion quintillion is, imagine all the grains of sand on a beach. Now imagine all the grains of sand and all the beaches in the world. Okay, that's about a quintillion grains of sand. Now, take that number and multiply it by 10 sextillion. In this analogy, if all of these grains of sand represented the value of gravity, how many grains of sand would you have to add or subtract in order for human life to be impossible? 1. 1 out of 10 sextillion quintillion. That's how precisely gravity alone has to be set for you to exist. The chance that gravity would be set this precisely by accident would be less of the chance of you winning the lottery every second in human history.
And as unthinkable as it might be, it turns out that even if the value of gravity were set this precisely, we would still have no chance of existing unless many other parameters were also fine-tuned to the same degree of precision. Perhaps the most mind-boggling of these is what's known as the cosmological constant, a sort of anti-gravity in the universe. The cosmological constant is said to be fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 120th. That's 1, followed by 120 zeros. For perspective, consider that there are only 10 to the 17 seconds in the entire history of the universe. There are only 10 to the 80 subatomic particles in the known universe. In fact, the fine-tuning of this one constant has had such a profound effect on scientists that it drove several nationally renowned scientists to publish a peer-reviewed paper called Disturbing Implications of the Cosmological Constant. One of the scientists is Leonard Susskind, known as the man who proved Stephen Hawking wrong. So what was disturbing about this constant? Consider these words from the paper. Arranging the cosmos as we think it's arranged would have required a miracle. It goes on to say, an unknown agent intervened in the evolution of the universe for reasons of its own.
This cosmological constant is a kind of anti-gravity. It is on such a narrow knife edge that it's almost inconceivable if you were to change it just the tiniest bit, we couldn't be here. This cosmological constant is tuned to 1 part and 10 to the 120, 120 decimal places. Nobody thinks that's accidental. That is not a reasonable idea, that something is tuned to 120 decimal places just by accident.
And yet, even with both gravity and the cosmological constant being fine-tuned with such unthinkable exactness, we would still have no chance of existing unless many other additional parameters were also fine-tuned in the same way. Here are a few of them. The ratio of protons to electrons, fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 37th. The ratio of electromagnetic force to gravity, 1 part in 10 to the 40th. The expansion rate of the universe, 1 part in 10 to the 55th. The mass of the universe, 1 part in 10 to the 59th. And the list goes on. To think that all these different parameters could each have arrived at such precise, life-permitting values by mere chance is beyond all reason and logic. But it is exactly what we'd expect to discover if it were all the product of design.
To believe that something like this could happen by random chance would be like you being in a cave and there's an earthquake. And there's only one way out of this cave, and it's a door. And it requires a password. You see, this password is 6,610 characters long. It happens to be the entire Declaration of Independence. And it must be typed with correct capitalization and punctuation on the first try, or you're dead. So the earthquake rumbles, and the ceiling starts to crack, and little pieces of rock start to hit the keyboard. And to your amazement, you watch the Declaration of Independence typed by falling rocks, and the door swings wide open. Now, if this happened to you, would you say, wow, that was a stroke of luck? That just happened by chance? No. You would know that something was up. You would know that this had been rigged. You would know that this was designed for you to live. And that is exactly how it is with the fine-tuning of the universe. So ask yourself this: what is the best explanation for how this universe is so astronomically and improbably rigged for you to live? Why is it fine-tuned so perfectly and precisely to allow you to have life, to have love, and to be able to even contemplate this very thought? When does chance become so inconceivable that it becomes intentional?
That's fine-tuning. So that's 3 lines of evidence. And so when we talk about this from a perspective of talking to someone who says there's no evidence for the existence of God, do these prove that God exists? DNA, the origin of the universe, and fine-tuning? No. What they do is that they are evidence that points to attributes of God based on the best explanation, science alone, without even bringing religion into it. Everybody tracking with me on that? This is how we present this. This is exactly what we would expect to see if God was the creator of these things and God designed the universe. So that answers the question of whether or not there's evidence for the existence of God. Clearly there is. So the next barrier is a question, and it is, who created God? Who created God? Now, I've often wondered why this is a barrier for people, because I really don't understand the strength of the argument. But basically they're saying, if everything, remember in the video, if everything that exists has a cause, who or what created God? What caused God? This is almost a reply. It's otherwise known as, who designed the designer? Now, even though this may not seem like a strong argument, to me it apparently is, because it was the center argument of famous atheist Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. This was the primary argument in his book. You don't really hear it much in professional philosophy, but I want you to hear a clip of what it sounds like on the internet.
What created God? So then I want to know where God came from.
Who created God? Who created the person who created God?
Who created God?
Okay, interesting. So as we listen to that, we say, the problem here, the objection, is based on this. There's an argument, as some of you people know, the Kalam cosmological argument. That is that everything that begins to exist has a cause, as you heard in one of the videos I played. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. And they say, well, if everything that exists has a cause, well, who caused God? Who created God? So that's the argument, just to make sure I'm doing them justice. So here's the deal. The person that's using this argument is not paying attention. See if you can figure it out. Listen to this clip.
Logic tells every one of us that whatever begins to exist has a cause. That whatever begins to exist has a cause.
So, it's not whatever exists has a cause, it's whatever begins to exist has a cause. So, here's the deal. As believers, we believe in what? An uncreated God, right? God is the uncreated creator of all things. And so, by asking the question, who created God, the person asking this is immediately redefining God into something that is not God. Okay, to ask who created God it makes about as much sense as saying, who made water dry? What? Who made water dry? Well, if something is dry, that can't be water, right? In the same way, the reason that is because if something is dry, that something cannot be water, because part of what it is to be water is to be wet, right? It's the same way with God. If something had to be created, then it's not God. That something cannot be God, because God, by definition, is the uncreated creator of all things. If there was a who or what that created God, philosophically, that would be God, right? So God, by definition, is uncreated. So they're not talking, it's a category error. They're not talking about God. So they're redefining God in order to make the argument. Now, scientifically, we've shown the universe shows that the science shows that the universe began to exist. In order for anything to, quote, begin to exist, it must have had something before it that was the cause of it. We've already gone over this. And whatever this was had to be itself self-existing. We know that time began to exist. If time began to exist, there had to be a cause for that. And whatever this cause for the beginning of time had to be self-existing, eternal, and uncaused. A lot like God, right? If there wasn't this kind of cause, then there would not have been a cause for what came to exist, and therefore nothing would exist. Is that complicated enough for you? So simply speaking, there had to be some sort of a first cause. And by asking what caused God, you're redefining God into something that is not God. Okay, there had to be a self-existing cause somewhere along the line, a creator of some kind. And so for believers, that makes total sense. Of course, that's God, the uncreated creator of all things, a supernatural creator. But guess what? Atheists are not off the hook on this. You know, they call us creationists, but guess what? Everyone to some level is a creationist, even atheists, because there is a creation story of some kind. And so when they say, who created your God, who created God, they're basically saying, who created your supernatural creator? We can turn that right around because it has to have an explanation. You can say, who created your natural creator? Because atheists say there has to be an explanation for all of this stuff to exist. They say it was nature that created it. Well, we can say, well, then who created your creator, right? It's the same way. But more so, there's a problem with the basic logic of a question like this. And it is basically this. So, for the sake of argument, what if I don't know who created God? Is that evidence that he doesn't exist? No. Is the inability to explain how something came to be evidence of its non-existence? Of course not. Many atheists, if you ask them, will tell you that they believe that gravity caused the universe to exist. Well, we could say, well, what caused gravity? Hint, we don't know. Scientists do not know what caused gravity. Side note there. So what caused gravity? We don't know. If we don't know what caused gravity to exist, does that mean that gravity does not exist? Of course not. We know that gravity exists because of its effects on nature, and it's the same with God. Okay, check this out.
Atheist Christopher Hitchens once said, "The postulate of a designer or creator only raises the unanswerable question of who designed the designer or created the creator." This is commonly used as an objection to the existence of God. To respond to this, let's imagine some astronauts traveling through the vastness of the universe in search of extraterrestrial life. They travel millions of miles through the farthest reaches of space, across countless planets and galaxies, until finally they come upon a random planet. They decide to enter its atmosphere and explore it. Their instruments immediately indicate that this atmosphere is not hospitable for human life. they still decide to go ahead and land to explore the planet further. As the light from the planet's sun starts to fade, they realize they need to quickly find a safe spot to land. They locate a flat spot to land, but as they approach their landing, they notice some sort of objects there. Once they finally touch down, they open their doors to explore the area. They see what appears to be a damaged vehicle or some kind of machine made of an unknown material. Then they observe the objects or mechanisms they saw as they were landing. They can see that these mechanisms are clearly created for some specific function. Even if they don't know what that function is, they can logically conclude that these objects were designed by some sort of intelligence. This is because they possess all the hallmarks of design that the astronauts innately and inherently know when they see. And they know this is logically true even if they know nothing about who or what created those objects. Unlike the formations of the rocks in the terrain, which were clearly the result of natural processes and erosion, these objects have an intended design, purpose, and function. Further ahead, they see an object that has some sort of language or code etched into it. And even though they have no way of knowing the meaning of those symbols, they know that they were the result of some sort of an intelligence rather than just random natural processes. They know that they can logically conclude that these objects were designed whether or not they know anything about the designer. Further ahead, they discover some sort of an optical mechanism. It appears to be observing them. Again, they know that this kind of a sophisticated mechanism is not the result of the planet's natural processes and erosion. This was clearly designed by some sort of an intelligent agent, and this is true even if we never know who or what that intelligent agent is. And if we conclude that this optical mechanism is evidence of design, why wouldn't we also conclude that this optical mechanism is the product of design? And if this language or code is evidence of design, why isn't this language and code evidence of design? And if these machines are evidence of design, why isn't this machine evidence of design?
So, the question of who created God, obviously, that's the answer. The next barrier to belief is a claim. And I've always wondered, why atheists and skeptics get upset specifically about Christianity, why you have rallies about Christians, but not rallies about, like, the Easter Bunny. And that sounds funny, but when I ask them, it's always the same answer, and that is this. Christianity is different because it's harmful to society, and that is the claim. Christianity is harmful to society. It's against human rights. It's the cause of most wars. It's harmful to children. Have we all heard this? Yeah, we hear this on a regular basis. So we're going to talk about these claims one by one. First, the idea that religion is somehow against human rights and human equality. Now, any knowledge of history shows us differently. It shows us that if it wasn't for Christianity, we wouldn't even be having conversations about things like human rights and equality. Why? Because they would probably not exist. You see, any historian knows the very concept of human rights, equality, and even democracy are a product of Christianity. Even atheist intellectuals agree to this. Renowned French philosopher Luc Ferry will teach us this, and this is an atheist. He says, before Christianity, there was the Greek world, and only human freedom and human equality was unheard of. It was Christianity that came in and changed that paradigm. In his book, A Brief History of Thought, he says this, in direct contradiction, Christianity was introduced to introduce the notion that humanity was fundamentally identical, that men were equal in dignity, an unprecedented idea at the time, and one to which the world owes its entire democratic inheritance. He calls Christianity the precursor to modern democracy. All right? This is an atheist. Another common claim, as you hear, is that religion is the cause of most wars. We hear this all the time. But this is simply not true, because there are many studies have been done on this, like the Encyclopedia of Wars, which showed out of 1,763 documented wars, only 123 were due to religion. That's only 6.8%. When you take out Islam, that's only 3% of all wars that you could ever attribute to Christianity. And Holly made that graphic, by the way. You remember that? Yep, you did. I stole it from you. Yeah, give her a hand. Great job. Yeah. So contrary to what we hear, Christianity is not the cause of most wars. It is not an oppressor of people or human rights. It is literally the cornerstone of Western civilization. And the very people admitting this are atheists, and there are many of them. There's even an article called "Atheists Sound the Alarm. The Decline of Christianity is Seriously Hurting Society." This is eminent atheist Richard Dawkins saying this: "Cut off from the source, our conception of human rights may shrivel and die very quickly, leaving us fumbling about in a thick, impenetrable darkness." They're talking about the decline of Christianity causing all of this. So contrary to the narrative that we hear, studies show not that Christianity is bad, but that it's good for society. That the happiest married couples, the happiest wives are Christians in America. People who follow God's standard for marriage are the happiest in their marriages. Belief in God has been linked over and over with economic and scientific expansion in societies. It's known to be good for families, and specifically, it has been shown over and over again to be good for children, mental health, intelligence, and behavior. And here's an amazing quote. Dr. Andrew Sims, who's a professor of emeritus of psychiatry and the president of the Royal College Psychiatrics, says this. He says, "The advantageous effect of religious belief and spirituality on mental and physical health is one of the best kept secrets in psychiatry and medicine generally. If the findings of the huge volume of research on this topic had gone in the opposite direction and had been found that religion damages your mental health, it would have made front page news in every newspaper in the land." He's saying this is the best kept secret in psychiatry. How about that? We don't hear about that on CNN, do we? No. So, those narratives are knocked out very easily with a little bit of knowledge. Now, the last question, and the last one we're going to talk about, is a question about significance. Are we significant? If God sees us as significant, why are we so tiny compared to the universe? Atheist Stephen Hawking, I already played a little bit of this quote, but the full quote from Hawking says this. It says, "The human race is just a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet orbiting around a very average star in the outer suburb of one among 100 billion galaxies. We are so insignificant," he says, "that I can't believe the whole universe exists for our benefit." Okay, this is a very common thing we'll hear. If God created us, if we're so special, why are we just this tiny speck in the universe? Okay, well, let's talk about the presumption. We're going to get a little philosophical here. Let's talk about the presumption going in here. And that is what? That size dictates value. Let me ask you, what makes that true? What makes that even true? Let's think about this. Before my son, I'm going to embarrass him, before my son was born, and a lot of parents can attest to this, before he was born, he was literally a microscopic speck in my wife's belly. And I did the math. He was 0.014 inches, and he was 0.004 ounces at that point. And yet, he was already the center of our world. Wow, that's weird. He was literally 0.00004% the size of our home, and yet it was built around his existence. Wait a minute, I thought size dictates value. No, the notion that somehow our size in the universe dictates our value is a cultural construct, but it has no objective truth. There's nothing objectively true about that. And listen, if you want to follow the logic, listen to this. If someone is using our size in relation to the universe as evidence that God does not exist, then does that mean if I'm the size of a planet, he's more likely to exist? Or if I'm the size of a galaxy, he's even more likely to exist? Do you think they would concede that? No. That's where that logic starts to fall apart. More so, even if someone could prove that physical size somehow dictates value, there is an assumption going on here. And that is the assumption that we are only bound to the physical and natural world. This argument only works if we are only physical, natural beings. But that is not who we are. That is not what the Bible or God says we are. God says we are at the core eternal, spiritual beings. That our physical bodies are merely a fraction of the whole of our existence. And that means that at the core, we are spirits. Well, guys, spirits and souls do not have physical size because they are not bound by or within the limits of this three-dimensional world. And so this argument only works if that's all we are, but we are not. This argument is based on the three-dimensional limits of length, width, and height, but that is not who we are as spirits, okay? But even if you could prove that physical size dictates value, that actually is the wrong perspective. Check this last video out.
Some people will argue that because of the vast size of the universe and the billions of galaxies compared to our tiny existence, that we are utterly insignificant, and therefore, this somehow disproves the existence of God. Here, we can see how our tiny existence compares to the grand scale of the universe. As we slowly zoom out, there's an elephant, the Titanic, Vatican City, Mount Everest, California, planet Earth, Saturn, the Sun, the distance to the Sun, Antares, the distance from Neptune to the Sun, the Stingray Nebula, 1 light year, the Pillars of Creation, the Tarantula Nebula, the Milky Way Galaxy, the Local Group, the distance to the Hubble Deep Field, and finally, the known observable universe. So as we zoom back in quickly, we can get an idea of our size in relation to the universe. And even though skeptics say that we are insignificant because of how we size up to the universe, what they may not realize is that when you consider the grand scale of everything, we are actually right in the middle. Why? Well, you can't just look at the larger things in life and just ignore the very, very small. You see, there's actually a whole different universe right on the tip of your finger, which gives a much different perspective to how we size up to the grand scale of things. Here we see a hummingbird, a coffee bean, an ant, a human egg, a white blood cell, the largest virus, DNA, a water molecule, a hydrogen atom, one picometer, a uranium nucleus, a proton, the range of the atomic weak force, a high-energy neutrino. Now, we're getting seriously small. And finally, a Planck length. So as we zoom back out, we can get an idea of our size in relation to the tiny things as well. From this perspective, we are far from insignificant. As it turns, in the grand scale of everything, we are actually situated right in the middle, seemingly strategically placed in the middle of atoms and galaxies. perfectly situated, in fact, at the perfect time in history, and the perfect place in the universe, to be able to see both the grandeur of the heavens and the intricacies of the subatomic world, both of which tell the amazing story of who we are, and how all of this was so apparently designed for us to be able to witness all of its wonder.
So as your mind, hopefully your minds are blown here. What God has enabled us to discover in science. It's not an accident. And so, you know, going back to what I started out saying here, that is about significance. And I'm not sure who all is here tonight. If somebody brought a friend, or if, like I said before, if somebody's here who maybe comes to church or is a regular here but has doubts, or somebody brought you, you are the person that I am talking to. And or anyone who has struggled with questions. And what we have to look at is the very first thing I talked about, and that is significant. When you take away all of what we discussed today, it all boils down to two questions, or two options, that is. Our significance, we are either A, created by a creator with a purpose, with significance, or B, we are just accidents, accidental byproducts. Those are the only two options for our identity in this universe. And the reason I show all of what I show is because this is powerful evidence for the first option. Because the evidence, all the stuff that we see here, whether you're somebody who's a skeptic, whether you are a believer, scientifically, evidentially, what we have seen here is the evidence shows and points to a powerful designer and creator of the universe, and a creator of the cosmos and of biology, and of a creator who sees you as significant. And that is the important part, significance. That if you are somebody who's come along and come here tonight thinking you don't have significance, that you don't have a purpose in this world, this counters that. This goes directly against that. Because this shows that you are more than just a random accident, that God, a creator, created you with a purpose. And he has presented this evidence for you to see, for you to be here, to pursue you. And you are being pursued right now. And if all of this is true, if you're someone who came here and you are unsure and you doubt, if this is all true, if everything I've said is true, this changes everything about you. Changes everything about who you thought you were, why you're here, what your purpose is. And if this creator is pursuing you with this evidence, there is a reason for that. There's a purpose for your life. And I believe if you're hearing this, you are supposed to hear this tonight. You are supposed to be here, sitting here in these pews at this very moment. I believe that. I believe that's why I was brought here. You are supposed to hear this. And you're being pursued by a creator who not only, from the evidence you saw, designed an entire universe for you to exist and give you significance, but who did something far, far greater. And that is, gave you the ultimate sacrifice, which we will get into more through these discussions. And that is the man, his son, Jesus Christ. And this is what this all culminates down to. When I do these presentations, we start out very broad. We start out with evidence for the universe and a designer. But the whole point of all of this, if you start to narrow it down, it lands right at the feet of Jesus, the man, evidentially, historically. And that is the point of all of it. And this creator tonight who's pursuing you as you sit here loved you enough not only to design a universe around you, but to send and give you the ultimate sacrifice of his son, Jesus. The whole point of what I'm talking about. And Jesus was a man who came and not only had power to overcome the laws of physics, but he had the power to overcome death itself. And we can have that tonight. So what I would like is for everybody just to kind of bow your heads, because I want people to be able to be free to do this. If you are somebody tonight who came here and you were doubting when you walked in this door and you still have questions, or you feel like you know God is talking to you through this, please raise your hand for me. Amen. I see it. I see it. And if you're somebody who has felt insignificant through your life, and you know that God is telling you you are significant and He wants a relationship with you, if you are here, you've never heard of Jesus, I want you to raise your hand as well. Amen. I thank you. Thank you guys for being honest about that. For the rest of us Christians, us cagey old Christians, you can open your eyes. I want us, when we approach people who disagree with us, this is an equipping class, but it's also for people who are here tonight who may be skeptics. The thing we always have to remember is what 1 Peter 3:15 says, and that is to approach anyone with gentleness and respect. And so what we do is when we're given evidence, like what we've seen tonight, we don't approach it to win arguments. And I've done that. I've been that guy. We do this with gentleness and respect. And we have conversations. And it's much more important to buy someone dinner than it is to win an argument with them. And I've learned that through all this. So as we go through this, maybe there'll be more times we can talk more about that. But I want to thank you guys for having me here. And I'm not sure if there is time, right at 8 o'clock. How about that? So thanks for having me. But if you guys do, we can dismiss now. But if you guys have any questions, if you want to do a little bit, like 15 minutes of Q&A, I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, I think, as Chip said, you guys are dismissed since it's 8 o'clock on the dot. Thank you.
Check. Hey, there we are. Hey, can we stand up? Can we give Daryl a hand? These guys did a great job. We're gonna keep standing. I'm gonna pray for you. And then for those of you that need to go, we want to honor your time. It is 8 o'clock, and so if you need to leave, you're welcome to leave. But if you have some questions, Daryl is going to stay for about 15, 20 minutes, and he's going to answer any questions you may have. Does that sound good?
Great. If you raise your hand and you want to come talk to me, I saw you, and I am going to be around, so I just want to make sure.
Yep. Let's pray, and then we'll dismiss and move on to the questions. Jesus, thank you for this time that you have given us today. God, just to come into your presence, God, and this opportunity to be equipped, God, to just talk to others and to be effective witnesses for you. God, I just pray, God, that the knowledge that we received this evening, God, that it would just, you would put it deep in our hearts. And God, when the time comes, when the time is right, when we get that opportunity, Father, I pray that it will bubble to the surface. And Lord, just like Daryl said, that we will engage those that have questions, God, not in an argumentative way, God, but in a way of love and understanding and grace, Father. And that love, God, that kindness, God, would lead those to repentance and to knowledge of you, Father. We just love you. We thank you for this time. God, I pray that you'd watch over us, protect us as we go. In Jesus' name, amen. If you have questions, you can be seated. If you need to leave, you're dismissed.